Hello! Welcome to the next episode of WotY, Book 4, Isolated Waters. We ended last part on a pretty good spot to end it. There's been going to be a brief little time skip, just a few days, to get to this next part. I think this will be a shorter recording than last. Probably gonna try to keep this about an hour. I don't know. This may end up being 3 hours. No, probably not. But the point is, yeah. Okay, we're just gonna jump right into this, shall we? In the span of only a few days, Usoko and Elizabeth had finally reached the second to last phase of their journey, the plane to Bermuda. It wasn't exactly a fancy jetliner like they'd been flying on before, and they'd been forced to travel coach for this short leg. As they boarded, Usoko once again saw that same black-haired girl she'd met in Japan. She was unmistakable, too, as she wore a pair of seriously thick-lensed glasses that almost looked like... And it was gone. Geez, thought Usoko, she knew damn well she knew this girl from somewhere. But for the life of her, the pinkette just couldn't place it. Still, all things considered, she really wanted to talk to her. They'd come this far together. It just seemed right. Hey, stranger, laughed Usoko. We keep meeting up, don't we? The girl fumbled awkwardly, glancing away from Usoko. Yeah, I suppose so. Very weird. You know, I could swear we've met before, replied Usoko. My name's Usoko Takibana. What's yours? Karumi, she said, a little too unsurely. Karumi Taniyama. Yep, that's me. Fine. At this point, I suppose there isn't much you can do, huh? Reaching around the back of her neck, Karumi removed a nondescript-looking necklace and... Kuriko! Yelled Usoko, causing every head in the plan to snap over at her. Oh, sorry, no emergency. The younger Takibana held her head low in shame. We hardly get to spend any time together these days, Usoko. I miss doing stuff and hanging out, she whispered. And when I heard about this, I borrowed something from Issei-san that lets me blend into the background. I shouldn't have lied to you, Usoko, but I just... Her eyes began welling up with tears, and any small part of Usoko that may have felt angry at her sister melted away in an instant. Oh, Kuro, she sighed, shaking her head and hugging her sister tightly. I guess there isn't really going to be anything to worry about, is there? Come on, let's go. Elizabeth glared daggers at Usoko. No, send her home, Takibana, she ordered. No distractions can be allowed here, and she is one big distraction. No. Usoko was about to argue that Kuriko wouldn't be a distraction when a better idea struck her. Her and Kuro had the same mother, which meant that Kuriko had to be half angel as well, which meant she should absolutely come along and learn whatever she could. I hate that you've made a point there, Takibana, grumbled the Dompier through gritted teeth. I always mess up. I hate that you made a point there, Takibana, grumbled the Dompier through gritted teeth. Fine, the kid can come, but she'll need a yokai crystal to unlock her power once we get there. Oh, that's fine, replied Usoko. I have a spare I was given by Nonami before she left. Kuriko can have it. Kuriko couldn't help but smile before taking her seat. She was going to get powers like her sister and get to learn magic. This was incredible. The plane ride to Bermuda itself was uneventful, much to Usoko's slight regret. Passing through part of the infamous Bermuda Triangle, she'd hoped to have seen some strange things outside her window, but the only thing out of the ordinary was what looked like a twig sticking out of the wing for a moment before disappearing. Thought Usoko absent-mindedly. I wonder how that got there. Before she could ponder it any further, a stewardess came up and offered her a complimentary drink, which Usako gladly accepted. She'd started getting a bit cotton-mouthed anyway. Speaking of, upon their arrival, once they had all their bags... the water tastes funny. Upon their arrival, once they all had their bags, Elizabeth immediately began rushing them to a waiting taxi, which would drop them off at the docks. As they entered, Usako couldn't help but feel like something was watching them, though no one suspicious was in sight. Still, Usako could feel something's energy, but chalked it up to the abundance of people around her and let it go. When they'd first arrived at the docks, Usako was a bit surprised to see the submarine out in the open. She had assumed they would be boarding in private, so as to not draw any attention. "This place does submarine tours of the nearby ocean," explained Elizabeth when Usako asked. "It's the perfect hiding place for such an operation. Need to hide a tree? Use a forest." That made enough sense to Usako, who boarded the yellow watercraft not long after. The bench seats were blue, cushioned, and there were several portholes along the side to allow passengers to see the ocean around them, as well as a reinforced glass bottom that served the same purpose. "Finally, the last leg," sighed Elizabeth in near relief as she stretched out and lay down on one of the benches. "This is honestly the part of the trip I have most looked forward to. The submarine ride will be several hours of pure, quiet, undersea bliss." "Fan of the ocean?" inquired Usako. "Certainly," replied Elizabeth. "The ocean is home to many creatures I particularly enjoy, both for their appearance or their skills. Take the carpet shark, for example. It disguises itself as the most innocuous thing, the seabed itself. Only once the prey is too close to escape does it strike, engulfing them in its maw." "Oh," frowned Kuriko. "Well, I like the pufferfish because it goes, ah!" "You sure do, kid," smiled Usako, rustling her sister's hair. Her eyes then narrowed as she glanced to the corner of the submarine. "Hey, is there supposed to be a potted plant here?" Elizabeth, who was already half asleep, tilted her head up. "What?" Usako motioned to where, indeed, a small shrub of some sort had been left in a clay pot on the floor of the submarine. "Probably one of the last passengers left it," groaned Elizabeth, laying back down. "If it bothers you so much, throw it out when we get to New Atlantis. Now, I'm going to sleep. Wake me if we start taking on water or we arrive." With that, Elizabeth turned her ball cap down over her eyes, indicating there would be no further discussion. "Well, that's that, I guess," sighed Usako. "At least we get to watch the ocean go by, eh, Kuriko?" Kuriko, curious, had gone over to the mysterious plant and picked it up in order to examine it closer. "It's an elm sapling," she stated with a bit of surprise in her tone. "Who would put a relatively common tree's sapling in a pot? Very strange." She set it back down, returning to her now confused sister. "Okay, how the heck did you know that?" asked Usako. The pinkette knew her sister was a pretty smart person for her age, but even still. "Oh, I've kind of gotten into botany lately," smiled Kuriko, plopping down onto the bench next to Usako and jimmying a book out of her courier bag. "I was actually reading about different trees on the way here. Did you know there are over 60,000 different species of trees in the world? 5,600 in Japan alone." The smaller Takibana looked her sister dead in the eyes, her expression more serious than Usako had seen it in a while. "I'm seriously thinking of going into botany, Usako. College is practically around the corner for me, and this is something that really interests me. You'll support me, right?" "You didn't even have to ask, kid," smiled Usako, putting a reassuring arm around her sister's shoulders. I'll always be in your corner, Kuro. You need me, I'm there." With a smile, Kuriko nuzzled against her sister, and the two turned towards the window to watch the sea life go by. As such, neither noticed when the potted plant glowed green briefly before pulling itself free from the soil and stashing itself inside of Elizabeth's bag. The child of Aramanus, known as Spriggan, had been tailing the group since they'd left Fumazaki, shrinking down to a much smaller form so as to better disguise herself. Her mission had been simple: to dispatch of Takibana while leaving her body intact for Aramanus to possess. An easy task, thought the plant woman. However, the appearance of Elizabeth, who was thought to be dead, had thrown a wrench into these plans, and so Spriggan had been forced to tail them for a little longer than expected. She had to know what was going on. That was fine, she thought. Slaughtering Usoko would be fun, but a whole undersea city? She would definitely enjoy picking apart. Besides, before she could do anything, she needed to grow back to her original form, and the merman would prove a wonderful food source indeed. A bored-looking Emiko watched as the white-covered ground zipped past the window of the train she was on, her fingers tapping the side of her head absent-mindedly. This was the last leg of her own journey, to meet the legendary Koume Hayazaka, who would likely be the only person with the knowledge Emi needed to defeat whatever it was that was attacking her. If she didn't know, then Emiko wasn't sure what she would do, or even could do, as the creature had proved immune to her electrical attacks, and the combined strength of 2 shootin' doji oni. Only the bullets fired from Megami's rifle had proved effective in wounding it, and even then, Emi doubted it would last forever. Koume really was her last hope. I know I said it before, but gosh, this is such a gorgeous view, sighed Hyoko wistfully in the seat across from Emi, as she looked out at the white expanse of snow that was the island of Hokkaido. The Yuki Ono was in her human disguise again, with her fiancé Junji in the seat next to her, also watching the train go by. Typos, sorry. Though was about as bored by Emi now. Okay, I'm just gonna restart that sentence, sorry. The Yuki Ono was in her human disguise again, with her fiancé Junji in the seat next to her, also watching the train go by, though was about as bored as Emiko by now. Hyoka, it seemed, just had a love for this kind of climate that had existed even before she died. This girl could not get enough of winter. Yes, it is certainly brilliant, I'll give it that, replied Emi, referring more to the glare than anything else. I just hope he will arrive soon, or I may go blind. As if in reply, the train's intercom then announced that their stop, the small town of Yozanru, would be next. In moments, they had their feet on solid, unmoving ground again, and Emi was quite grateful. Blinking twice, her body activated a natural glare-reducing membrane in her eyes that would function like sunglasses for the final leg of the trip, walking to Nazonoyuki, the village where humans and monsters lived in harmony with one another, and where they would find Koume Hayazaka. One side effect of this membrane was that it made the whites of her eyes appear black, so she really hoped they wouldn't run into any other humans on their way. Okay! Cheered Hyoka, her pink boots barely touching the ground as she hopped back and forth excitedly, like a child at Disney World. Let's get going! She looked quite adorable in her, albeit unnecessary, given her state, oversized light blue puffer coat and white leggings. Quite a contrast to Junji's brown overcoat, covering a pair of jeans and a cable-knit sweater. As for Emiko, she was wearing a long, royal blue puffer coat with basic warm-weather clothes beneath, since, as a blue oni, her body temperature was much higher than a human's. Still, she needed to bundle up a little, as the wind could be biting at times. But nothing more than she'd worn was necessary. In fact, they had only been walking for an hour, when Emiko started to wonder if even that may have been too much, as she was already sweating quite a bit. Hyoka dear, could you deal me a little icy wind? She asked of her teammate, since they were a good ways out of town, where no one could see them. Believe it or not, I'm starting to feel a little toasty. I would rather not, Ayame-san, gulped Hyoka. My powers are still... I'm still trying to get them under control, you know? Wouldn't want to freeze your head solid on accident. Though she was laughing it off, Hyoka was very much worried about that very thing. Ever since her vision in the temple on Kaiju Island, Hyoka had been reluctant to use her powers to do little more than chill a drink, let alone use them on a friend or in combat. Hold on. He's almost like Bleach. And before you ask, no, yeah, this is from the tap, so I don't know. Anyway, I don't know why I'm bringing that up. A part of her hoped that there might be something in Nazuno Yuki that could help her control them better. Oh, well, that's all right then, replied Emmy, removing her coat and throwing it over her shoulder. I guess I'll do fine without this. We've thought enough out now that I suppose I don't need it. In fact... Her body shimmered briefly, and Emiko assumed her Oni form, still wearing the same clothes she had before. Emmy had worn baggy clothes on purpose for this reason. Think I'll join ya, smiled Hyoka, placing a hand on her crystal as her hair and skin turned back to their regular light blue color. No matter how many times I see it, I never get used to it, chuckled Junji. How does it feel? Like, does it tingle or something? Both girls looked at each other. Well, I don't know about Hyoka, as I don't use a yokai crystal, explained Emiko. My disguise is an illusion, you see, which makes me look entirely human, save for the eyes. So it really doesn't feel any different. Just less of a strain, since I don't have to keep up the illusion. Hyoka? Oh, well, for me, She pondered that for a moment, even swapping back and forth a couple times to test. It's like, well, you know when you have glue on your hand and you peel it off? Kind of feels like that when I turn it off. Turning it on doesn't really feel all that weird. Maybe because I'm a ghost? Emiko nodded, adding, I've heard that for the races closest to humans, the changes aren't really all that uncomfortable. For some Oni, they've described the sensation of turning theirs on, like putting on a suit that's too tight, or trying to wear clothes meant for kids. Crammed. Lots of us crave the ability to live as we are, and not how society forces us to, myself included. I just happen to be privileged enough to be able to basically live as myself with minimal effort. It's something I've learned not to take for granted. The snow was starting to get a little deeper here, even though they hadn't strayed from the trail. It was up to Junji's knees and Emiko's lower shins. They kept walking anyway, not wanting to get caught out here before nightfall. I couldn't imagine what it's like, replied Junji. To have to hide your true self from the world, I mean. I do, said Hyoka somberly. That's right, you... Emmy was going to say more, but cut herself off. She didn't want to open any old wounds for the Yuki-onna, instead opting to hug the girl. In her human life, Hyoka had always been something of an outsider due to her being trans. Not even her family had truly accepted her, more like they humored their confused child for a time. Hyoka didn't speak much about her past, and Emmy certainly wasn't going to push her. Fortunately, Hyoka chirped up to change the subject, talking about a new game she'd started, and after only another half hour of walking, they finally arrived at the gates of Nazuno Yuki. Standing at attention was someone who, at first glance, seemed human, but Emiko's eyes could see the faint triangular outline of a cat ear against her scalp. Fortunately, since both girls were in their true forms, they were let in immediately, although Junji's electronics were confiscated as a precaution. No photography, they were told gruffly by the cat girl who let them in. To describe Nazuno Yuki in words would not do it justice. It was a place of profound and mystical beauty. The entire village was concealed within a forest, walled off by rows of trees kept tight rather than any sort of stone or concrete barrier. The walls were not to keep people in, of course, but to keep nosy outsiders out. Many of the houses in the village were buildings... wait. Typo. Many of the houses in the village were built into the largest of these trees. Narrow rooms, but with many stacked atop one another. There were also houses that had clearly been constructed, and no two looked alike. One was made from polished stones, smooth and reflective like glass. Another used repurposed car parts in its walls and structure, with license plates from all over the world covering the exterior like siding. Yet another still, and this one Hyoka particularly liked, was carved from a single block of permafrost and was home to a family of were-penguins. Yes, you heard that right. Were-penguins. Deal with it. At the very back of the village, framed against the setting sun, was their destination, the manor of Koume Hayazaka. It had started life as a simple cabin, but over the years and decades it had been added on to, like the Winchester Manor in San Diego, in miniature. Rooms within rooms, stairways that led to nowhere, architecture that didn't seem to follow any human logic patterns whatsoever. It was a home built for spirits, through and through. It now covered 2 acres, with the attached library almost the size of Usoko's own apartment complex. If there was anyone who could claim to be the elder of the village, it was definitely Koume. At the gate, they were greeted by a specter of a man in a dapper suit. In fact, the suit, hat, and monocle were the only visible parts of him. "Are you here to see my lady?" he inquired in a posh but not arrogant tone. "She rarely accepts visitors these days, you understand. Did you have an appointment by chance?" Gardner should have called her Gardner should have called her ahead of our arrival, replied Emiko cordially. "I am Princess Ayotne." Apologies, Your Majesty. Apologies, Your Majesty. Indeed, you are expected," he answered with a bow. "Where are my manners? Do come in, please." With a flick of what Emmy assumed to be this invisible man's wrist, the gate to the front yard opened wide to allow the 3 companions onto the manor grounds. "I am Dunsworth, madam," explained the spectre as they walked up the brick path to the house. "I take care of my lady's day-to-day needs, as does my counterpart, Yuri. Here we are, the front door. Open sesame." With an over-exaggerated flush of movement, Dunsworth opened the door to allow them in. If the manor's exterior seemed chaotic, then the interior was like a home designer's worst nightmare. Random doorways, some regular, some smaller than a baseball, some larger than even Emiko, dotted the main hall. There were even windows, remnants of the original cabin it seemed, peering out into nothing but the framework of the other rooms. What light there was provided by a gas lamp hanging from the ceiling. As they took this in, the sounds of footsteps could be heard slowly approaching. The aged figure of Koume Hayazaka came from one of the larger doorways, aided by a walker. Despite her advanced age, the top living expert on spirits had an energy about her that was hard to describe. She just had an adventurous glint in her eye, the visible one anyway, since her long silver bangs covered the right side of her face. Her gaze perked up immediately when she saw Hyoka. "My word, a Yukiona!" she exclaimed. "I haven't seen one of your kind in many years. Such a rare sight indeed, Miss Kaguri. Hyoka Kaguri," answered Hyoka. "And rare? Are we? I'm still very new to this." "Indeed. Why, in all my years, I've only ever met one other, smiled Koume. They tend to live in the most remote, cold, isolated, and inhospitable areas, so trying to meet one is typically ill-advised. Ah, but where are my manners? Princess Ayamiya, welcome to my home. Oh, that's a tricky voice. Emiko chose not to correct the older woman on her name's pronunciation. She knew it wasn't meant out of any ill intent. More importantly, it was irrelevant to her reason for being there. Making their way slowly to the adjacent study, Emiko sat across from her host at an old wooden table as Junji and Hyoka plopped onto a nearby sofa.
Straight to the point, then,
said Emiko, affecting a regal posture and tone.
First and foremost, I would like to thank you for your time, Mrs. Hayazaka, and for inviting us into your home. Recently, I have been attacked on several occasions by a creature that, while at first appears to be undead, shares more in common with spirits than anything else.
She went on to elaborate on everything that had occurred in the past several days, including two other sightings she'd had on the first leg of the trip. She hadn't seen it since leaving the main island, which likely meant it had been unable to follow her this far. All in all, it took a good hour and a half, as Koume kept interrupting to ask about certain details such as movement patterns, smells, whether it showed any interest in attacking animals, or if it was simply focused on her. When Emiko had finally finished, both Hyoka and Junji had fallen asleep on the sofa in each other's arms, and Koume's gaze was fixed firmly on Emiko. I see, was all she said for a moment, before pulling out a small bell and ringing it twice. Before Emiko's eyes, a spirit manifested in the room, clearly a yurei from her traditional Japanese funerary garb. Yuri, be a dear and retrieve all the literature in regards to revenants, would you? And liches as well. The girl nodded, her long black hair flipping over her face from the momentum, startling her for a moment before she pushed it back and faded away again. My apprentice, explained Koume. I am teaching her everything I know, on the off chance that, when I die, I pass on instead of staying behind. Someone has to continue this work, you see? Now then, I believe what has been attacking you is indeed a revenant. Emiko frowned. A revenant? Once again, it seemed something she regarded as myth was coming out of the ethereal realm to sideswipe her. Briefly, she wondered if this was how Usoko felt about all of this at times.
Forgive my ignorance, said Emiko, but I thought... Forgive my ignorance, but I had always heard revenants weren't real.
You'd think that, chuckled Koume. They're even more rare than your little blue friend on the sofa. Revenants are born when a soul is wrongfully slain, but has enough righteous fury in it that it's able to essentially possess its own corpse. The process usually takes days, if not weeks, as it isn't easy to make dead meat move again. And usually by the time the revenant has managed it, they're 6 feet underground, where they then rot away and pass on. She stopped for a moment, pondering something. Strange, though. Revenants only attack those who were responsible for their untimely demise. Princess, I'll be blunt here. Have you murdered someone recently?
Emiko gulped. Yes. She knew she absolutely had, even if she hadn't been of her own mind and body when it had occurred. The Suzumiya girl. Yes, it was 7 months ago. I slew a human in cold blood. I know it sounds bad, but as insane as it might be, I was being controlled. I'm not able to divulge the specifics, but suffice to say I was not myself when I killed that girl. Koume nodded, rubbing her chin thoughtfully.
That about settles it, she said solemnly. You're being targeted by a revenant, and judging from what you've told me, she's already on the precipice of becoming a lich. That is something that cannot happen.
About then, Yuri manifested back into the room, carrying 4 books. It was the third one that Koume grabbed first.
If revenants are rare, liches are all but unheard of, she explained. But they have existed before, long ago. The Man of Marco, the King of Worms, the Sundered Lord. These 3 are the most infamous liches to have ever existed. Each one of them very nearly obtained the Staff of Anubis, and fortunately, each one of them was defeated before this could happen. Even without the staff, however, a lich in the modern age could quite possibly ruin everything organizations like Gardner have sought to keep. The veil between the worlds. They can raise the dead, and their power keeps them from rotting further. And they can even regenerate themselves by sucking the life force from the living. You must stop this girl before she can become a lich, Ayamea.
Emiko nodded, taking a few minutes to let everything she had been told sink in. A revenant. The Suzumiya girl. Liches. It was almost too much to comprehend, but one question burned in Emiko's mind. How can I stop her? Can she be fixed?
Fixed? I don't know what you mean, Princess.
I did this to her. She doesn't deserve a second death at my hands as well. I know I cannot bring her back to life, so how can I bring her peace?
You would have to die,
answered Koume bluntly.
That would douse the rage fueling her body, and her soul would be able to pass on. Judging by the look on your face, I'm assuming you'd hoped for a better answer?
Yes, I had, sighed Emiko. Well, that was absolutely out of the question. There was no way in hell she was going to let herself be killed by it. By Midori, Emiko corrected herself. Now that she had a name to put on this thing, the least Emiko could do was use it. Surely there must be another way. You must know some way of returning her to her senses. Koume seemed to mull it over for several minutes, as though running several different ideas through her head. Finally, she seemed struck with inspiration.
Yes, and ironically, it requires the birth of a lich.
Didn't you say letting her become a lich was a bad idea?
Yes, and it still is. But hear me out.
It had been several days since Nonami's walkabout, and finally Francine had awoken to be greeted by Bethany. For the entire time she'd been unconscious, the silver-haired maid had not left her side. As such, it was her voice announcing Francine's awakening that roused Nonami from her sleep. Rubbing her eyes, she slid the coffin lid open a little and peered out to check the sunline on the floor. As it was gone entirely, Nonami knew it was safe to open the lid fully and stepped out, quickly throwing on her nightgown and heading to her sister's bedroom. As she did, she couldn't help but go over Charles' warning from the other day in her head. Usoko's mother was an angel, and despite myself being over us, we quickly fell in love, he said to begin the explanation. Opposites attract, I suppose. Usoko was, well, to be blunt, an accident. We both knew that any child we had could potentially become insanely powerful as the dark and light in them clashed. Fortunately, Tatsu knew a thing or two about sealing powers, and just after Usoko was born, she placed a spell on her that would lock her Overus and angel powers away, leaving her, to all appearances, be human. He paused, gazing up for a moment as if reminiscing. You might think that I left her when I found out Kuriko wasn't my daughter, but honestly, it didn't matter to me. I left because there was something I needed to do. You see, I knew it was only a matter of time before Usako learned of her true nature, one way or another. So I began searching for artifacts and relics, items that she could use to contain that power. Contain or conduct. I found what I thought to be a shotgun about 3 years ago, one imbued with magical properties that allowed it to fire whatever was needed from it. It vanished about 6 months ago, as did possibly the most important discovery I had made to date, the Lance of Longinus itself. Nonami's eyes widened. The lance is real? Describe it to me. That's the thing. You see, it takes on a different appearance depending on the wielder. To me, it took on the form of a rapier made of gold, a weapon I am quite skilled with. To my colleague, it was more akin to a pole vaulting stick, only gilded. She used to be an Olympic-level gymnast, thus the odd form. The description of the weapons sounded an awful lot like Usako's weapons, Nonami thought, but chose to keep that to herself for now. Okay, but it feels like you're getting off topic. Why is Usako in danger, aside the obvious? It's as simple as this. Like it or not, Usako's magic is born from the Book of Araman. With Araman as loose once more, she is ripe pickings to become his vessel. She may have fought him off once, but he is nothing if not persistent. And the more magic she accumulates, the more power she gains, the more enticing a target she becomes. But beyond even that, there's the more important reason. The light and darkness within her are now able to combat each other once again whenever she transforms. Every time they clash, her power grows. To a point, this will be beneficial, or seem that way, but it will grow to become more than her body can handle. When that happens, it's inevitable. Her and approximately 50 square miles around her will explode in a blast of light and death. Well, that was certainly a twist. I don't believe you, stated Nonami. How could you know all of this? There isn't any precedent, no way of possibly knowing unless I was given a vision. Yes. I've seen my own daughter's death with my own eyes. It isn't something one can forget. That's why I'm doing this. I hope you can understand, Aunt Maria. Unless the two halves of Usako can be brought into balance, she's essentially a ticking time bomb. By the time Nonami's reminiscing had ended, she had made it to Bethany's room. Her older sister was sitting up in bed drinking a glass of water, an action rarely seen in Castle von Orlok. As well as Nonami and Bethany, Murnau had also arrived just after her, accompanied by Claude. How are you feeling, champ? Asked the elderly vampire, concern audible in his voice despite his attempts to mask it with his usual cheery attitude. You've been out for a few days now. Had everyone a fair bit worried. Francine's eyes widened a bit in surprise, but she didn't say anything right away, continuing to sip her water. After a couple more minutes, she finally managed to get out a few raspy words. Drained. My power. Getting low. Not much left now. Just the effort needed to speak was almost too much for the woman, and she fell backwards into her pillow, the water spilling out over the blankets. Before anyone else was able to react, Bethany had pulled the wet blankets back and thrown a replacement onto the bed. So quick were her reflexes that hardly a drop of water had actually touched Francine or her clothes. She fell back asleep then, her breathing ragged for a bit before evening out. All four vampires in the room exchanged the same worried look. She's on borrowed time, declared Murnau grimly. I believe she may have only a little magic left in her, And it's the same magic that has kept her alive this long. It wasn't fair, thought Nonami. She'd just gotten her older sister back, only to lose her so soon. She couldn't accept this. She wouldn't accept this. With a flush, she turned towards the door and began making her way to the library. In her father's secret collection, she knew she could find something to reverse this. She had to. Hi, kids. You might want to wake up. You don't want to miss this sight. Hail, Sarah. I can only do one Irish accent, okay? The voice belonged to the leprechaun captain of the submarine, calling to the Takibanas, who had fallen asleep about half an hour ago. Rubbing her eyes awake, Usoko nudged... Rubbing her eyes, Usoko nudged Kuriko awake. Port side, coming about now, he continued. It never gets old, but nothing beats seeing it for the first time. From behind a large reef, out of the dark ocean water, came a beautiful sight the likes of which neither girl would ever forget. A perfectly circular city made of sparkling coral imbued with gemstones, tucked neatly below an undersea cliff. Houses made of a green-blue stone dotted the outskirts, with a rise in the average building height as you got closer to the center, where an olive-green column of a substance known only as orichalcum. Where stood an olive-green column of a substance known only as orichalcum. Canals lined the pathways, and even from this distance, Usoko could see the movement of gondolas and rowboats in them. Despite being so far below the sea, it looked as bright inside the dome as it was on the surface above. It's incredible, she whispered in absolute awe. A real underwater city. Atlantis. From the top of the column spread a dome made of what at first seemed to be glass, but as the submarine approached, Usoko realized was a giant bubble. This realization made her more than a touch nervous, even after being told the bubble was nigh indestructible. As they passed through the bubble's membrane, the submarine shifted its form, changing into a gliding craft which set down on an elevated tarmac above the city, made from polished sea stones and shells. Hold on a sec. So this is New Atlantis, right? Asked Usoko of Elizabeth as the Dompier stretched. Yes. The old one was destroyed by the Ovrus, sunk far below the waves. But this one is underwater too. I'm confused. Why was sinking it like bad? Because mermen aren't acclimated. Because mermen aren't acclimated. I can't say that word. What the? Because mermen aren't acclimated to the pressures of the deep sea, Usoko, sighed Elizabeth. They die down there. Thus the need to build here, in the Goldilocks zone of the sea. Leaving Usoko to scratch her head in confusion, Elizabeth retrieved her luggage and began making her way to the exit. She'd been here several times before, and as such wasn't exactly impressed anymore by the sights. The same could not, however, be said for Kuriko Takibana. Immediately as she stepped off, she was in awe, her eyes barely focusing on any one thing for even a second before darting off to someplace else. Even the most mundane of structures to the average Atlantean was like a work of art to the younger Pinkette. It's so beautiful, she whispered as tears flecked her eyes. I can't believe something like this exists. It's incredible. As she stepped forward to get a better view of the area below them, 2 armed gillmen came walking up the steps ahead of her, forcing Kuriko to stumble backwards. Hold on a second. Welcome to New Atlantis, travelers, said the first, a burly man with red and orange scales. What is your business in our city? I love doing that. It took Usoko a second to remember the note she'd been given by Emiko, which was apparently a writ from her father granting them passage into the city. The Blue Oni had been an invaluable help to the mermen, providing much aid and resources to the rebuilding effort. As such, the word of the Blue Oni king was viewed nearly as highly as their own queen's.
Here, she said, handing the guard the note. This should explain everything. I'm here on a learning expedition with my classmate and sister.
Oh, that's cool, but can I see your passport? Asked the second guard, an odd blue-gill man with off-yellow eyes. The first guard elbowed him roughly, and he slunk away. Ignore, Benry, he scoffed. Got kicked by a sea mule, and hasn't been right since.
Oh, okay,
replied Usoko with a blink. He read over the note for another minute or so before handing it back to Usoko.
Damn it.
Everything seems to be in order. However, it says nothing about your sister tagging along. Can you explain?
She was so saddened that she couldn't come along that we simply couldn't leave her behind.
Half lied Elizabeth.
I am certain that if you were to contact His Azure Majesty, he would be more than happy to give dear Kuriko his blessing.
That said, do you want to be the one who wakes him in the middle of the night just to do that very thing? The guard seemed a little nervous at the proposition and so abated his questioning, letting the girls pass. Okay, I'm just going to pause real quick. That Gilman voice, you have to just get a tiny little bit of water in the very back of your throat to do it. It's tricky. Maybe one of these days I'll put out a video where I actually kind of explain it. But anyway.
After about 6 hours of walking through the streets of New Atlantis, a trip that should have only taken a third that long normally, but was extended due to the Takibana sisters' need to explore and take in the sights, the trio finally arrived at their lodgings. They would be spending their downtime in Emiko's own villa, which overlooked a good portion of the city from a marble and copper balcony. The villa itself was primarily constructed from the same teal stone material as many of the other structures in New Atlantis, with a dark green roof. When Usoko took a closer look at the odd material, she could see that it actually pulsed with a faint gradient of colors, green to blue, to violet, to pink, red, orange, yellow, then back to green. It wasn't too apparent, but even from a distance, if one looked for a while, you could notice it. Prismarine. The villa itself had been prepared for their arrival, and had been stocked with both fresh food in the kitchen and pantry, as well as fresh linens, the latter of which had just been laid out when the girls arrived. Their beds, Usoko discovered quickly, as she tested them the moment she walked in, were supremely soft, like sleeping on a cloud. Hey, so I've been working on a magical girl transformation sequence with Kuriko, said Usoko as the two unpacked. Care to watch? Elizabeth rolled her eyes, but nodded. Very well, but make it quick. All right, sis, hit track 1. Suddenly, Kuriko appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, boombox in hand. As she hit play and the music began, Usoko began going through an admittedly impressive choreography, though Elizabeth was a bit distracted. She was absolutely certain she had heard this song somewhere before, and when the vocals kicked in, it hit her. It was Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up, Never Gonna Give You Up, but set to a tempo 25% faster. Really? She groaned, so loudly in fact that it threw Usoko off during a tricky flip, and she landed flat on her face. Of all the songs in the world, that one? Why? Ow, moaned the pinkette. Though she was able to slow her transformation for the sake of the sequence, the loss of focus made her finish it reflexively, and she laid there on the floor like a confused pigeon. Well, I like how it sounds, and at that speed it's perfect, sighed Usoko as she started changing back. Besides, it's not like we're in it. Besides, It's not like we're in an anime, Mina. I don't have my own background music playing, so I have to make do.
Meta humor.
Okay, fair enough, she admitted begrudgingly. After a few more moments of unpacking, the pinkette turned to her once enemy again, another, albeit more important question on her lips this time. Hey, so is it just me? Or does it feel like we're...
Hello there!
Chirped a new voice from the doorway before Usoko could finish. Its owner seemed to be a being pulled straight from Jurassic Park, with a long, angular head ending in a beak, a pair of wide, webbed wings on either side of its reddish scale and feathered body. It waddled in, using said wings as forelegs, though a set of smaller vestigial legs in the back helped keep it balanced. The yellow reptilian eyes of the creature had a great wisdom to them that even Usoko could see. Being watched? She managed to just barely finish. Usoko was dumbfounded at how this tiny pterodactyl had managed to get into what was supposed to be one of the most secure buildings in the city after the palace. They hadn't even heard a sound. Hell, Usoko hadn't even sensed this thing's approach. Yet here it was before them. Here it was, crouched before them. Hey! Shouted Usoko, her bat now out in front of her as she put space between it and Kuriko. Who are you? The creature flailed backwards, covering its head with its large wings, and trembled.
Mean you no harm, I do. Do I?
It cried.
Wondering who you are as well, I am. Get sued I might be.
The situation felt incredibly familiar to Usoko, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. I'm looking for a great sorceress, she explained, already putting the bat away in its extra-dimensional pocket. Someone who can teach me a spell I need to... Well, just trust me, it's important. The creature stood back up, slowly, as it was clearly advanced in age and needed time to readjust itself. When it had done so, it had an odd glint in its eye.
Quezzacon, yes. See, Quezzacon you do.
I can't take my own writing seriously.
Yes, not far she is, no.
Then it clicked into place for Usoko. The act this thing was putting on, at least she hoped it was an act, or she might have to begin questioning reality. You can drop the act. You're her, aren't you? Both Quezzacon and Elizabeth were a bit stunned. How had Usoko figured it out already? Let's just say I've seen this movie, replied Usoko when asked. You're the sorceress, right? The one I've come to see? Quezzacon stiffened, standing up straighter than she had a moment ago, and looked much more imposing as well.
The sorceress I am,
she replied, either refusing to drop the backward-speaking quirk or unable to.
Traveled far you have to see me. To learn the spell to awaken your mother. Think you able?
I have to, said Usoko firmly. She's counting on me.
On just you think, but in truth another there is, yes?
Asked Quezzacon, circling over to Kuriko and handing the girl a yokai crystal. The same one, in fact, Usoko had brought along. But how?
If two there are, a better chance there is that one can learn it. Take the crystal and realize your potential, you will.
Disney doesn't have the backwards speaking trademarked, right? Right? I hope not. Cautiously, Kuriko reached out for the crystal. It was pale, devoid of any color, much like Usoko's had been that first night. The younger Pinkette looked over to her sister for encouragement, and Usoko gave her a nod of approval. Though Usoko was still trying to grasp the bizarre speaking patterns of the sorceress, she knew the pterodactyl was right, in that if both Takibanas were angels, they could both potentially learn the spell and have a greater chance of it working. Placing it around her neck, Kuriko glowed with a brilliant golden light for a few seconds. When it faded, she had gained a pair of wings exactly like Usoko's, and that was about it. The only other change was that the transformation had burned away the black hair dye, so she once again resembled herself. No fancy weapons appeared in her hands,
No armor or dress replaced her clothes. The only noticeable differences the observers could make, aside from the wings, was an unmistakable rose smell now permeating the room. As for Kuriko, she noticed something odd immediately. The world had become incredibly blurry. Wait, no. It wasn't that the world was blurry. Rather, something was making it blurry. What could it be? Had she gone partially blind from the light? She reached up to her face, and that's when it hit her. She was still wearing her glasses. Hesitantly, she slid them off of her face and looked around. She could see. For the first time in her life, the world was crystal clear to Kuriko Takibana. No longer would she need those thick-lensed spectacles to see.
It's incredible,
gasped Kuriko, spinning in place as she flapped her new wings for the first time.
I feel so light. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's amazing. Is this how you feel all the time, sis?
Usoko thought about it for a moment, as she'd never really considered it much. Honestly, when she transformed, she felt more like... Hi, kitty. More like there was a storm in her body, complete with flashes of thunder and lightning. Sometimes, though, something went just differently in her transformations, and she felt more alive, unrestricted by life's burdens, even if just for a moment. I think I do, she replied, but I've also got another side to me, thanks to Dad, that you don't. Quetzalcoatl nodded sagely. Half angel only, the girl is, she explained. Easier it will be for her to learn what is needed than for you. Not an insult to your skills, this is. Simple fact that half Overus are you. The way she spoke the word Overus contained more hatred and venom than Usoko had ever heard from anyone. Elizabeth had mentioned before that the sorceress was the last of the Thunderbirds, and Usoko knew from reading the history of her race that they had all but wiped them out as a mere test of their abilities. That Quetzalcoatl was even willing to speak to her at all, let alone was willing to teach her the spell she needed, spoke to either the direness of the situation or the Thunderbirds' own willingness to forgive. Somehow, Usoko believed it was more likely the former of the two. Alright, I think we'll stop there for this time. Just short of an hour, but like I said, this was going to be a shorter one. Partially because I've got a stream to do soon, I think. I actually don't know. It depends on... Well, let me check my notifications real quick. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba. Okay. Well, that's concerning. Anyway, so yeah, we're gonna end here. Next part, I think there's probably gonna be 2 more parts of this. Either 2 parts or 1 long final part. But yeah. I don't know if I'll do book 5 right away. Kind of want to, though, because book 5 was kind of fun to write. Or I guess technically it's book 3 now, because, yeah, Prelude to Chaos and Winter Snow are going to be 1 book. And Terra Firma and Isolated Waters are going to be a 2nd book. Oh, by the way, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. War of the Yokai is becoming a visual novel. I'm not kidding. We're actually working on it. I'm commissioning people for sprites. I got some people working on programming. We've already had some musicians for a time. This is happening. Yeah. So if you want to contribute, I'll be holding a fundraiser stream sometime in the future. I don't know if it's near future, but the future. We'll be making some merch down the road, stickers and maybe shirts to kind of fund the project. Maybe we'll do a GoFundMe. I don't know. We'll see. It just depends. But I do have a coffee page, but I don't have the link. So I don't know why I even brought that up. Point is, keep your eyes and ears peeled. There'll be more information about this as, it becomes available. But I'm very excited. We're looking for voice actors, so hey, a lot of, female voice actors. So if you think you could, it takes to voice Usako or any of her friends, by all means, I'd love to receive your audition. Just DM me on Twitter at RickoManiaVT. Or, nope, yeah, that's pretty much the only place you can contact me right now. So yeah. Or you can get in contact with my manager, Melody, at, Majestic Dewback, that's spelled with a K. Majestic with a K. Yeah. But, probably easier to go straight through me, though. We have a Discord server. That's where this is all kind of being assembled, Avengers style. But anyway, I'm rambling. So, I'll probably do a dedicated video just for this stuff. Rambling. Okay, with that, y'all take care. See you in the next one. Have a great night. And, sayonara.